going to give an educational session tonight, and it is regarding one of the very basic of speaking skills, how to conclude your speech. Now, we all have to end our speeches, and so for maximum impact, it's important that we get it right. So tonight's topic is conclude your speech, and Simon's going to give us some tips on how to get great speech conclusions.
Thank you. Just imagine you have done absolute killer presentations. Come to a fabulous conclusion. You have the audience eating out of your hand. People come up afterwards and shake your hand and say, well done, that was absolutely what I needed to hear. I now know how to do with whatever problem I deal with. It's a stunner. Knockout. Alternatively, how many times have you seen absolute pigs of speeches where people end, well, thank you, I'm really sorry about the presentation and the didn't work, video didn't work, I'm sorry about that, but thank you all for coming out on a really terrible night like tonight. And, stop! Don't do it! Ending your speech with power is so important. So tonight, I'm going to focus on some tips for and techniques for having really stunning closed speeches. Let's look at some criteria. First of all, a good conclusion achieves a sense of closure. You've finished and people know what to do and you've really wrapped up the subject. Good. It makes an impact. You've left people thinking differently, thinking, feeling differently, or going to do something differently thereafter. Short. Don't start your conclusion halfway through your speech and say, and to conclude, and 10 minutes still be talking. You need to have a short conclusion. Perhaps 10% of your total speech time. Tips for success. Let's have a look at some do's. Memorise your conclusion. Nothing worse, ladies and gentlemen, as I was saying, no! Don't do it! Memorise your speech, particularly the conclusion, so you can look your audience square in the eyes. Gaze into their eyes, deliver that killer line right into their face. Or into their eyes. End on time. I'm very sorry, we're going to have to wrap up now, and sorry, missed the punchline. Time your speeches. End on time. Also, that's one reason you don't want to compress your carefully crafted end to your speech, and you don't want to be hauled off before you get there. So it's rude to the conference organizer that you take other people's time. It's rude to your fellow speakers. So end on time. End with power. Make an impact. Here's some don'ts. Questions and answers, unless you have to. I've been, would you believe, at an accountants conference today. Lots of fascinating presentations on VAT, pensions, and every speech ended with Q&A. Handing the power away to the audience. Any questions? No. What do you do next? You've lost it. Unless you're really specifically asked to end with Q&A, please don't. It just hands your power away, and the only answer to a bad Q&A is to go for coffee earlier, and you've lost it. Do all you can to avoid Q&A, and thank you all for coming out. No thanks, right? You are listening to one of the best presentations ever. You are listening to one of the best presenters ever. You should be thanking me. Remember, it's about power. It's being up here. I'm very sorry about that.
Don't apologise.
Oh, right, sorry, that's what it is. I was at a poetry gig a couple of weeks ago where one of my fellow poets had a little emotional upset in the course of her poem. That's the stock in trade of poets. We do get upset. We wrote personal stuff. And this young lady had a original upset. Perfect. Then she regained and carried on and delivered a very good set. And in concluding, she said, "I'm sorry about that emotional upset." No! Don't do it! We'd all forgotten about it. We'd enjoyed the rest of the performance, the rest of her gig, some stunning poetry, and then she took us back to where she was sobbing in a corner. No! What's the point? Don't go back there. Move forward. Makes sense. There are several techniques. One which I'm only going to mention briefly is the summarise, which is where you tell people what you're going to tell them, and you tell them what you told them. That's the summarise technique, right? It has its place, very good, but that's quite an easy one. So we'll go to some other ones. Quotation. I'm going to spend more time on that. Calls for action, and the story close. So let's look at the first one. Quotation. It adds authority. It can amuse the listener, and it can add drama to your speech. Let's look at one of... Sorry. Oopsie! Let's look at one of the most famous... No. I'm trying to do this suddenly. I don't know how I click on that. No. Oops. There we go.
State in every city. We will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
By using biblical language, King created a moral imperative. His marchers became crusaders, and he, a symbolic Moses, to deliver Americans to the promised land.
I get goosebumps watching that. It ticks a lot of boxes. I'm going to send you all an email that has analysis of that speech by on a TED speech. It's well worth listening to. I think some of you have seen it already, but that'll be an email I send out tonight. But it doesn't have to be that dramatic. Even in our own club, we've had some stunning quotations. This is one I've checked with Sarah before using it, and it's a speech she delivered in May, one of the best speeches I've heard in this club. Absolutely peach. And she ended with a quotation. She'd been talking about her life as a covert stammerer, the trials and tribulations, and she ended like this.
I think that the stammering author, David Mitchell, pretty much summed it up in an article I read recently where he said, the footballer Jimmy Greaves once said that an alcoholic is an alcoholic for life, but that his goal was to become a teetotal alcoholic. My goal is to become a non-stammering stammerer.
Absolute peach of a conclusion. Just put the cherry on it. Brilliant. Not complicated, just the right quote, right level of authority. Quoting someone who's written a book, brilliant. Adds authority. Really, that was one of the best speeches I've heard in this club. And that conclusion was part of that. So let's look at other techniques. The call for action. Drink Coca-Cola. Good conclusion. Visit Fred's store. All these advertising calls for action. And it clearly explains what action the audience should take. Oops, don't know where that came from. Here's one of the most famous calls for action in the English language. Henry V once wore into the breach. Definite call for action. Olivier, 1945.
Dishonour not your mothers! Now attest that those whom you called fathers did beget you. Be copy now to men of growth of blood and teach them how to war. And you, good yeomen, whose limbs were made in England, show us here the mettle of your pasture. Let us swear that you are worth your breeding, which I doubt not, for there is none of you so mean and base that hath not noble lustre in your eyes. I see you stand like greyhounds in the slips, training upon the starts. The game's afoot. Follow your spirit, and upon this charge, try God for Harry, England and St. George!
Powerful wonderful stuff. Doesn't have to be as dramatic as that. There's a famous call for action in a political speech which didn't quite come off. It's quite famous, more famous for not working, which was David Steele at the Liberal Party conference in 2003. Go back to your constituencies and prepare for government. It had that sort of effect long term, absolutely nothing. But it did come true eventually. So that's a powerful technique. So here's another technique that's quite good. Watching the timing. Which I will... It refers back to the body of the speech. It needs to be short and it should reinforce your message. And I'm going to use a quote from the 2001 World Champion of Public Speaking, Darren Lacroix, and he's going to do this part of the presentation with me. In fact, it looks like Harry Hill is because he's also a stand-up comedian.
But here's a great close, my favorite, and it's called the dialogue close. In order to have a dialogue close, it's much better if you can call back to it. Meaning you told the longer story earlier on in the presentation. So it's the gist and it's part of the body. But what we want to do in our close is call back to that. So for example, in one of my stories, I talk about the little old lady at the craps table who taught me a powerful lesson about learning something new. It was great. So I tell that story early on in my presentation. But when I come to the close, the key line of dialogue, what I'm trying to summarize and get people to do is to take some action in this case. And so, for example, the purpose of many of my presentations is to get audiences to get out and speak more. I give them techniques and what to do to be better, but you got to get out there and speak. So I call back to an earlier story from the little old lady. Now, the little old lady has a line of dialogue that I call back to, and that becomes my close. So after my call to action, after I review my speech, I come and say, I don't know what that little old lady's name was, but I'll tell you this. If she was here today, she would tell you, get in the game. And then I would walk off. Now, obviously, the story has to be earlier and powerful, but we're calling back to that, and that's how we're closing our speech. We never want to close our speech on, thank you, what an honor, just like in the opening. That's boring. We want to leave them. And as Patricia Fripp says, your last words linger. They're going to remember the last thing you say, so you don't want that to be boring. So
to summarize, you can use the summary technique. You can use a quotation. You can use a call for action. And use story close. Great is the art of beginning. Greater is the art of ending. Henry Wordsworth Longfellow. A call for action. Once more into the breach, dear friends, and compose compelling conclusions, please. And, as the little old lady said, a strong conclusion will give your presentations purpose, power, and punch! Oh.